Hello and welcome to ACT's webinar on covering all the angles of student success, using many sources to inform admissions and enrollment practices. You can go to act.org/social to follow ACT on social media and learn about upcoming webinars, and go to act.org/research to find more information about topics we'll discuss today. Our webinar today will last 60 minutes with time for questions from you before we wrap up. As the webinar is ongoing, and if you have questions for our presenters, or if you're having technical issues, please type them in the questions panel on the right side of your screen. We'll get to as many questions as we can during the spoken Q&A portion of the webinar, and we'll answer other questions via email in the next few days. My name is Will Vallette from ACT here in Iowa City. I'm joined by three presenters today from ACT, experts on the topics of multiple measures in students' decision-making. They are Kenton Pauls, Director of Higher Education Partnerships, Krista Mattern, Director of Statistical and Applied Research, and Jeff Allen, Principal Research Scientist in Statistical and Applied Research. Before we begin, just a quick note. In a few days, we'll send you instructions to access a recording of today's webinar, along with links to additional materials related to topics you'll hear about today. So look for that in a few days. Once again, thank you for joining us today. I'll now turn it over to our first presenter, Kenton Pauls of ACT.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction, Will, and thanks to all of you for joining us at today's webinar. We're grateful that almost 500 individuals have registered for this conversation, and we all hope that it's beneficial for each of you. And to that end, we have prepared a great deal of content to cover today, and on this slide you see an overview of what will be discussed in the coming hour. Jeff, Krista, and I will discuss the power of using multiple measures that span the traditional and the non-traditional, and we'll offer an introduction to the beta version of a prototype tool which clearly demonstrates the utility of insights that we share. I'll start our time off today by addressing the use of traditional measures before I turn it over to my colleagues in research who will address some further insights relative to the use of non-traditional ones. Now, it wasn't long ago that I was reviewing applications and making admission decisions that impacted students' futures. I recently served as director at a mid-sized public university and most recently as Dean of Enrollment Management at a private college in Iowa. So I understand what it's like to be in the trenches. I understand the challenges and the competing pressures that you face. And while I've been at ACT for about a year and a half, I've come to realize that I probably didn't have the kind of assessment literacy that I could or should have had when I was serving on campus as an enrollment management leader. I probably could have been more effective in how I used assessments like the ACT. Now, what do I mean by assessment literacy? We would say that an enrollment manager with high assessment literacy is one who can effectively analyze, evaluate, and interpret quantitative and qualitative evidence provided by assessment. It's one who applies the measures or the results of assessments properly to the admissions, enrollment, and student success decisions that get made. Now, over the past 20 or so years that I've been in this field, I've seen many changes, though I've seen some things also remain unchanged. There are new questions that have surfaced while others have lingered for a long time and have become part of the ongoing conversation. Now, one such lingering and long-standing question about, among practitioners is the question about the best way to use and consider early academic indicators to predict student success. If we only consider high school GPA and test scores, how effective can we be at evaluating a student's academic promise? That's the question that we've heard for a long time. And what we've seen consistently in the research and in practice over time is that the relationship between academic indicators provided early and student success, that we've seen that the relationship is statistically significant. We've seen that it's strong and that it's helpful for practice. So as a practitioner, I've sometimes felt that there were challenges to applying these well-documented and commonly understood statistical findings. Consider this example. A standard model will predict that a student with a high school GPA of a 3.0 and an ACT of a 22 will achieve a first-year GPA of roughly 3.2. When that student doesn't achieve a GPA close to that prediction, the model is considered to be flawed or faulty. From the perspective of a statistician, I'm prone to think that the model failed whenever a student has a first-year GPA that is significantly different from the prediction. The reality is, however, that prediction error is a common occurrence. It's common for the earned first-year GPA to not precisely match the predicted one. So what do I do with this observed variance? Not as a statistician, but as an admissions director or as a dean. So if I put that hat back on, if I'm once again imagining that I'm a director or a dean, I'm likely to regard the prediction flaws that are exposed by a student who does better than expected. I might regard those flaws differently from the flaws that are revealed by a student who underperforms or who does worse than we would expect. Though under and over prediction, or excuse me, overachievement reveal prediction errors, and we want prediction error to be minimal given the importance of the decisions that we're making. As a prediction, as a practitioner, I'm likely to regard overachievement as being less problematic than underachievement. And to that end, I really found the recent work by Krista and Jeff, also on this panel, and you'll hear from them shortly, in their recent test optional research that was published in October of 2016, to be really helpful for me. They shed new light on this question and have helped me better understand the meaningful correlation between early indicators and predicted academic success. And I hope that you find the same insights helpful. They utilized a different type of statistical analysis to visually depict incremental validity. This figure shows that at every point along the high school GPA continuum, and for every ACT composite score range, the probability of achieving a 3.0 or higher increases incrementally as the ACT score increases. Though prediction error still exists in this type of analysis, they offer a new and visually clear way to see how high school GPA and ACT scores, when they're combined, are much better at predicting success than when either measure is regarded on its own. And this holds true for long-term academic outcomes as well. This chart shows the incremental validity of the ACT composite score in relationship to the probability of achieving a 6-year cumulative GPA of 3.0. And this next slide, though we're not going to unpack it in detail, shows that the notion of this incremental validity holds true for subgroups as well. Now, ACT has long encouraged institutions to evaluate the usefulness of ACT scores for predicting academic performance for a school's population. And as you consider conducting this type of research on your campus, perhaps an evaluation of this type will be fruitful for you. So the slides and the conversation so far provide some further insights into better understanding the way in which traditional early cognitive measures are meaningful when it comes to predicting student success. So ACT encourages colleges, and universities to consider more than these traditional cognitive measures. We encourage schools to consider the whole student. By taking the holistic approach, you'll be able to better make decisions and to apply targeted interventions that will help students persist through graduation. And to begin the conversation about non-traditional measures, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Jeff Allen, who serves as ACT's principal research scientist. Jeff?
Thanks for that lead-in, Kenton. So today we're going to be talking about 3 non-traditional measures, or at least 3 measures you may not be familiar with: high school academic rigor, academic behaviors, and interest major fit. All 3 of these measures were developed and validated by researchers at ACT, and we'll be focusing on why we think these measures are useful, how they were derived, and we'll provide some empirical evidence of their importance. But first, let's take a step back and recap what we get with our traditional measures: simple overall high school GPA from the core subject areas and ACT test scores. When used in combination, these 2 do a pretty good job of predicting how well students will fare academically their first year. We've collected college GPA data on hundreds of thousands of students and found that the overall predictive strength of the 2 measures is about 0.52, measured using the correlation scale. This correlation would actually be even higher if all students went to college. But students self-select which colleges to apply to and enroll at, and colleges select which students to admit, and this process leads to lower correlations. If we had perfect prediction, we'd see a correlation of 1. So our 2 traditional measures are getting us a little more than halfway to perfect prediction. So one reason for considering additional measures is to improve prediction of college outcomes. Prediction models provide an empirical basis both for admissions and for identifying students in need of additional support. Another reason for considering additional measures is to improve diagnosis of student needs. High school grades and ACT test scores tell us a lot about a student's overall level of academic preparation and even which subject areas they're best prepared for. But if we knew more about things like the rigor of their high school experience, their academic behaviors, and how well their personal interests align with their chosen major, we might be able to help them even more. So the first measure I'm going to talk about is a measure of high school academic rigor. The research behind this measure was just conducted in the past year, and so we're just beginning the process of communicating what we found with the outside world, beginning with you. So why should we try to measure rigor? Well, we know that high school GPA is typically the single strongest predictor of first-year college GPA, but it may not mean the same thing for all students. Its meaning could depend on the mix of high school courses that form the GPA, variation in grading practices across schools or classrooms, and whether or not the student was enrolled in advanced coursework, such as advanced placement and honors courses. All of these issues make it difficult to compare high school GPA for any two students, especially when they're from different schools. So measuring rigor might help overcome this problem. Measuring rigor is also a good idea because doing so encourages students to pursue rigor. If it were ignored completely, students would be incented to pursue the highest possible high school GPA and to take the easiest courses to get there. We also know from prior longitudinal studies that rigor is predictive of college degree attainment. High schools and colleges sometimes operationalize rigor by weighting the high school grades differently, by only counting certain courses, or by awarding bonus points. But what evidence drives decisions of how to weight or how many bonus points to award? Researching rigor could help inform how rigor is operationalized. When people talk about rigor, what do they really mean? What is it that makes high school coursework rigorous? For one, taking challenging elective courses is related to rigor. Course choice has become somewhat less of an issue because of states' high school graduation requirements for courses taken. But there's still some room for choice, for example, continuing to take math courses beyond Algebra 2, even though it's not required for graduation. That's something that will help students prepare for college. Some aspects of course rigor are more difficult to observe or measure. The intensity and difficulty of a course, as well as the quality of instruction, are related to the concept of rigor, and these are things that can vary across schools and classrooms. I'd argue that level of student engagement in a course contributes to rigor. Students with high engagement and effort will benefit more from the high school courses, and course grades can be considered a proxy for that level of engagement and effort. Some high school courses have a special designation such as AP, honors, or dual credit courses. By design, these courses are meant to be rigorous, but some research has shown that these designations don't necessarily guarantee that they're rigorous. And finally, we might think of high school coursework as rigorous if it's well aligned to what's taught in college courses so that the transition to college is more seamless. So rigor is a multifaceted construct, and I'd argue that it's very difficult or maybe impossible to measure completely. And our approach for measuring rigor is limited. We only attempt to capture some aspects of rigor, those that are highlighted here in green, using the data that's available to us from students when they registered to take the ACT test. This chart shows the statistical model we use to develop our measure of high school academic rigor. We use data available to us through ACT testing programs together with first-year college GPA records for over 100,000 students. Through the ACT registration process, students indicate which courses they've taken and what grades they earned, plus what courses they plan to take. They also indicate whether they've taken any advanced placement, accelerated or honors courses in each of the core subject areas. The high school coursework and grades data and 8th grade test scores are included in a model for predicting first-year college GPA. 8th grade test scores are included in the model to isolate the effects of the high school coursework and grades data. By doing this, we're more certain that the measure of rigor reflects course-taking decisions and effort during high school as opposed to general academic ability. This chart only shows the 5 English courses, but the model included 30 courses across all subject areas, plus the indicators for advanced coursework. For each high school course, students are grouped according to whether they took the course and what their grade was. The model then determined the weight for each of those groups based upon its empirical relationship to first-year GPA. And through this approach, the data determine how rigor should be operationalized. As an example in this chart, I show the weights that we estimated for English 11. Students who earn an A or B in English 11 receive a positive weight, whereas students who earned a D or F receive a negative weight. Students who didn't take English 11 received a weight of 0. Unlike high school GPA, these weights don't assume equal increments of course grades, and they don't assume equal contributions across the different courses. We also found that taking one or more advanced courses in English increases first-year GPA, so students who took advanced courses would receive an additional positive weight. Each student's rigor score is then determined by summing the weights across all the 30 courses and all the indicators for advanced coursework. Our approach for measuring rigor lets us see which high school courses are most predictive of first-year grades. A high school course could be important simply because taking the course is important, or because there's a strong relationship between grades in the course and first-year college grades. Here we have listed the 6 high school courses that rose to the top. Surprisingly to us, the English courses were most predictive, in particular English 11 and English 10. These 2 courses are taken by virtually all college-bound students. For example, the difference between earning an A and C in English 11 is over 2/10 of a grade point, and this is after controlling for all other high school coursework and grades data and those 8th grade test scores. One reason we think the English courses are so important for first-year college courses is that they're typically writing intensive, and we know that strong writing skills are important for many college courses. Chemistry and upper-level math courses were also important, and this is consistent with prior research. Remaining in math after Algebra 2 and performing well in those courses is still an important predictor of success. Across the 4 core subject areas, social studies courses were generally least predictive of first-year GPA. Now, this doesn't mean that social studies courses are not important. It just means that in our data, they didn't relate as strongly statistically to first-year college GPA as other courses. We then evaluated how well the rigor index predicted first-year GPA. Correlations can be used to measure predictive strength, and the simple correlations with first-year GPA are given by the blue bars in this chart for overall high school GPA, ACT composite score, and the rigor index. Consistent with our past research, both high school GPA and ACT composite score are correlated with first-year GPA with correlations of about 0.48 and 0.4 respectively. The rigor index had the largest correlation of nearly 0.5, and this really isn't surprising because the rigor index was empirically defined to optimize the prediction of first-year GPA. Now, the correlations only tell us how each measure predicts by itself. Multiple measure weights give us an indication of the predictive strength of each measure when they're considered together. The multiple weights for each measure are given by the orange bars in this chart, and you can see they're all smaller than the correlations, and this is because of some redundancy or overlap across the 3 measures. In the multiple measures model, the rigor index has the largest weight, followed by ACT composite score, and then high school GPA. High school GPA decreases the most because of its redundancy with the rigor index. When using these three variables together, the multiple measures model outperforms a model based on any single measure, and the total predictive strength in our sample was a little bit higher than 0.52, and we got a modest increase in predictive strength over using only a high school GPA and ACT composite score. The rigor index we developed has some limitations. For one, we're only able to capture some aspects of rigor that was dictated by the data that's available to us. Some aspects of rigor, such as differences in grading standards and differences in the intensity and quality of courses, are more difficult to observe and can vary across high schools and classrooms. Another limitation is that we relied on student self-reported high school coursework and grades. A study based on official transcript data would have been better, and would also allow us to learn more details about each course, such as whether it's an AP, honors, or dual credit course. Another limitation of the study is its reliance on first-year GPA, which represents a mixture of different courses that can vary for each student, and it's possible we could have gotten different results if we were able to account for the difficulty of first-year courses. I'll now turn it over to my colleague Krista, who's going to talk to us about measures of academic behaviors.
Great, thanks, Jeff. As Jeff just mentioned, we're going to talk about another factor that is important for student success, academic behaviors. So why do we care about academic behaviors, and why should we measure them? Well, there is a great deal of research showing that academic behaviors are related to students' likelihood of not only staying in school, but being successful. For example, students who are more conscientious, motivated, or maybe you've heard a term such as gritty, tend to do better in school. These students are also more likely to be successful once on the job. Therefore, cultivating these skills early will help put students on a path of success. Along these lines, research suggests that these skills are malleable and can be developed. Findings indicate that identifying students with poor academic behaviors and intervening is one of the most effective ways to get students back on track. ACT has long recognized the importance of academic behaviors. Based on empirical findings, ACT developed a standardized measure of academic behaviors over a decade ago, ACT Engage. There are three versions, a middle school, high school, and college version, that were created to be developmentally relevant to different populations of students and covers three broad domains. The first domain, motivation, is related to one's personal characteristics that help students succeed academically by focusing and maintaining energies on goal-directed activities. Social engagement is the second domain and represents interpersonal factors that influences students' successful integration into their environment. And finally, the last domain is self-regulation, or cognitive and affective processes used to monitor, regulate, and control behaviors related to learning. I will now turn to some empirical results demonstrating the value of understanding students' academic behaviors in addition to some of these traditional core academic knowledge and skills. So on this slide, I have two graphs showing the average first-year grade point average by both test scores and academic behaviors. The graph on the left are the results for four-year institutions, and the graph on the right is for two-year institutions. If we focus on the four-year results, we see that among students in the top 25 percentile of ACT composite scores, so the bars on the right side of that first graph, you see students with higher academic discipline scores, which is one of the scales of ACT Engage, tend to earn higher grades in college. So if you look at that last black bar, you see their average first-year GPA is 3.57. However, for students who are still academically able in terms of test scores or cognitive skills, those with low Engage have a much lower first-year GPA. Their average first-year GPA is 2.74. What I want you to also note on this slide is that sometimes non-cognitive skills can compensate for lower cognitive skills. So again, the student who had high test scores but low academic discipline scores, they had a 2.74. But if you compare that to a student with a middle 50 percentile ACT composite score but high academic discipline scores, their average first-year GPA was 2.98. So they had lower scores but higher academic discipline scores and did better in college. If you look at the results for two-year institutions, they are largely the same. On this next slide, it's very much similar graph, the same kind of setup, but we're looking at different outcomes. And so here we've provided first-year retention rates by, again, test scores and engaged scores, and then timely graduation rates. So did the student graduate within 4 years? So if we focus on the timely graduation graph, you can see, again, students in the top ACT composite score, the top 25%, nearly half graduate within 4 years if they also have high engaged scores. That compares to only a third who have low engaged scores. So again, by knowing both pieces of information, we have a better indication of who's likely to be successful and can intervene for those who might need additional support. So that leads me to my next slide. How would one use ACT Engage on their campus? So returning to what Kenan mentioned in the beginning about assessment literacy, you might be wondering, would this be for admissions? Would this be for advising? And since Engage is a self-report measure, it's possible for students to fake on this type of measure. That is, it's easy to spot the correct or desirable response. Therefore, the use of such a measure for high-stakes decision-making, such as admissions, may not be advisable. However, once on campus, Engage is a very valuable tool for identifying students academically at risk. So in this table, you'll see, as compared to chance, the Engage success indices do a much better job at identifying which students will drop out and those who will have academic difficulty. Once identified, resources and/or interventions can be provided to struggling students. I will now turn it back to Jeff to discuss our research on interest major fit.
Okay, so the third and final measure we're going to discuss is what we call interest major fit. And as the name suggests, this measure attempts to quantify how strongly an individual's interest matches their major. Interest major fit is just one aspect of fit with one's major. There's certainly other considerations for choosing a major, such as academic fit and whether the major is aligned to career and earnings goals. First, why do we need a measure of interest major fit? Most students who take the ACT express some kind of uncertainty about their college major, and this can take the form of being undecided on a planned major, or planning on a major but being unsure of that choice, or expressing a need for help in educational or career planning. And overall, about 60% of students who take the ACT express some kind of uncertainty. So understanding how an individual's interests align with different major environments can help support guidance and exploration for these students. Another reason to pay attention to interest major fit is that students with good fit are more likely to remain in their first college major. In this chart, we've plotted the percentage of students who remained in their initial major through the third year. Persistence in major increases both with ACT composite score and with interest major fit. Changing majors is not necessarily a bad thing, but it can sometimes lead to delayed graduation and more college expense. So to recap, we think it's important to measure interest major fit because many students express uncertainty about their college major and because having higher interest major fit is associated with positive outcomes. So how do we measure interest major fit? Our measure is based upon the comparison of student and major interest profiles. For both students and majors, the interest profiles are based on Holland personality types. Holland's theory states that people and work environments can be classified according to 6 types: realistic, investigative, artistic, social, enterprising, or conventional. Among other things, The theory states that people of the same personality type work together to create an environment that fits their type. People seek environments that match their personality type, and when they find it, they tend to be more successful and satisfied. This theory is often applied to work settings, but it also applies to college majors. The ACT Interest Inventory is a survey asking students to rate whether they like, dislike, or are indifferent to certain activities. It has 6 scales that correspond to Holland's 6 personality types. And here we've listed an example survey item for each of the scales to give you a sense of what that survey is like. And students can take the ACT Interest Inventory when they register to take the ACT test. So we obtained the profile for each major by finding the average scores for students who are enrolled in each major in the 3rd year of college. This graph shows example profiles for 4 college majors. 3 of these majors have what we call high differentiation, meaning that they have at least one clearly defined peak personality type. For example, students that are majoring in cell biology tend to have very high investigative scores. Students in theater arts tend to be highly artistic and low conventional. Accounting students, on the other hand, tend to be high conventional and low artistic. Other majors are less differentiated. The profile for teacher education major is represented here by the black line. And as you can see, this profile doesn't have a strong peak personality type, and it only has a very modest peak for the social personality type. So our our interest major fit measure compares the student profiles to major profiles. This chart shows an example of a student with very strong fit with cell biology. Similar to the major environment, this student's peak personality type is investigative. Our fit score is based on the simple correlation of the student and major profile, and that we then put that score on a scale that ranges from 0 to 99. In this example, that score is 96, so it's nearly at the top of the scale. And here's what it looks like when there's poor fit. This student has a social personality type and does not enjoy activities related to the investigative type, so has a low fit score with respect to cell biology. When students take the ACT test, they indicate their planned college major. Interest major fit can be evaluated with respect to students' planned college major, as well as all other possible majors. The blue bars here represent the distribution of fit scores with respect to the planned majors, and the red bars represent the distribution of fit scores with respect to all other majors. So this chart shows that interest major fit tends to be higher with respect to planned major. And this is evidence that students tend to take their interests into account when selecting a major. Yet there's still quite a bit of variation in level of fit with planned majors, with some students having relatively poor fit with the major that they plan on entering. So all of the alternative or non-traditional measures we've talked about today can be included in multiple measure models. Here, for example, we've summarized the prediction weights for explaining timely degree attainment using the traditional predictors, high school GPA and ACT composite score, and 2 of the non-traditional measures we discussed today, a measure of motivation from the ACT Engage assessment that Krista talked about, and interest major fit. The rigor index was not included in this analysis because this particular study was conducted before the rigor index was developed. We see that the traditional measures here have the largest prediction weights, and that the non-traditional measures also contribute. When used to identify students in need of additional support, multiple measures can include background variables like family income as well. Now I'll turn it back over to Krista, who's going to bring us home.
Great, thanks, Jeff. We wanted to use the remainder of this presentation by demonstrating some prototypes of user tools that we've started to build here at ACT, which really embody this notion that multiple measures lead to more personalized feedback and insights. So the first tool is what I'm referring to as the Personalized College Readiness Zone. And I'm going to transition over to a web page. So sorry, one second. Okay. So the idea here is students could go to this website or app, or this could live on My ACT, and students could enter information about themselves, or it could be pre-populated based on what we already know about students. And we could provide more personalized feedback on their probability of earning a B or higher in the first year of college, returning for the second year, and for graduating within 4 years in general or for specific majors. And so this deviates from what we currently report to students on the score report. We have the ACT college readiness benchmarks, and students either met or did not meet them, but it's only based on their test scores. And so you can see in this tool, if again, we only know their test scores, if a student got a 22, earned an ACT composite of 22, and they didn't select a major, we would say they have around a 50% probability of earning a B or higher in college, 79% probability of returning for the second year, and roughly a 29% probability of graduating within 4 years. But if we know the student is also a straight A student in high school and has a 4.0, we could enter that information and the values update. So now it's not a 50% probability of earning a B or higher, it's moved up to a 75% probability. But this doesn't take into consideration one's plans and one's goals. So we know some majors are more difficult than others. So if the student's interested in going to engineering, they can select a major and it would update the probabilities again. Other predictors that we've included in this prototype are the interest major fit that Jeff just went over. So if they have good fit, we can update the model. And if they're highly motivated, so the academic discipline scale that from Engage that we talked about earlier, again, the results will update. The second tool I wanted to present is the Personalized Interest and Academic Major Map. Currently, when students take the ACT, they're provided with information on interest major fit based on their interest inventory scores and their intended major. So all the information Jeff just went over. The report also suggests best fitting majors, but again, this is just on their interest inventory scores. So we know that different majors have different academic requirements. We just saw that with engineering. So to address this need, we developed a prototype that takes in consideration not just their interests, but their level of academic preparation when suggesting good fitting majors. So on the left side, again, you'll see the predictors going into the model there that's actually driving the prototype that you see on the right. And so we have, again, students' ACT composite score, and then there's 6 interest inventory scale scores that Jeff talked about, artistic, social, so forth. And so if those values are in there, then we can plot students in terms of their fit for interest, and that's the x-axis. So those profiles and the correlation that Jeff showed, if there's a better or higher interest fit with a major, then the major will be plotted to the right. So it goes from poor fit, -1, to good fit, 1. And then on the y-axis, majors are plotted in terms of academic fit. So we looked at students who went into this major and were successful and looked at their average ACT composite score and then compared it to the student's composite score. And so some majors where students are more academically prepared, that might be an academically challenging major. And then for majors where students have lower scores, that might be an academic safety. And you can see the majors that fall within ±2 ACT composite score points are in blue, and then majors that have good interest fit are shaded in yellow, and then the overlap is what we call the sweet spot, where you have both academic and interest fit. And the idea would be, if we built this out, that students could select on those majors. This is legal professions and studies, and could learn more about that or find schools near them that are offering this major on their campus. But the tool also is interactive, so if the student retested and scored higher, the majors would be plotted, would be updated. So really, we see the value is knowing more about a student. We can provide more personalized feedback to those students to help them with their educational and career planning. And I want to turn it back over to Kenan to wrap us up.
Great. Thank you, Krista and Jeff. And as we wrap up the webinar today, and before we get to the question and answer period, I hope that you found our conversation thus far to be helpful. Our goal has been to uncover new insights that will help you better utilize available resources in support of your admissions and enrollment management decisions. ACT offers many tools, research, and insights that are intended to assist today's enrollment management professionals who seek to serve students on their journey from admissions through graduation. And perhaps the conversation today has piqued your interest and you may wish to ask further questions. Maybe you'd like to expand your use of ACT's tools and resources and data, and we would love to help. Will mentioned early on that there's an email that is going to be sent your way. And in that, you'll be invited to name areas where you would like to have some specific follow-up. We can offer more information that may help you better understand the correlations between ACT and high school GPA and the academic success of your individual students. You may find that you want to explore how to better utilize other data that's available and provided from ACT score centers, perhaps to consider some of the interesting things that Jeff highlighted regarding academic rigor and interest major fit. It's likely that some of you will have an interest after hearing Krista speak about Engage College. You may have an interest in considering using that assessment on your campus to positively impact your advising efforts. So much for that follow-up email, and thanks so much for joining us on this webinar. I'll turn it over to you, Will, as we go into the question and answer period.
Thanks, Kenton. And once again, yes, we will be going to some of your questions. On the right side of your screen, you'll see a panel where you can type in some questions for us, and we'll get to as many of them as we can here during the Q&A in the next 15 minutes. Any that we are not able to get to, we will answer via email if we are not able to get to them. Our first question is related to interest major fit. What are the best ways and what is the best time to measure interest major fit? Can it be measured in high school, or is it even possible to be measured in college?
Yeah, I think it's good to definitely measure it for the first time in high school when students are planning on their major and exploring majors. It could potentially even happen before then, as soon as a student really starts considering different careers, which could happen, in 8th grade and above potentially. Could happen in college as well. If a student is dissatisfied with their major and looking to explore others, it could be a prime time to explore and a tool for exploration there as well.
Okay. The next question is about the ACT score report, the ones that colleges and universities receive about students. The data in the college score report is pretty widely available at campuses. How can post-secondary institutions use the information in the ACT score report to make decisions about students?
The ACT data that's provided to campuses for their score senders or students who send their scores to institutions is just a treasure trove of information for colleges to use as they're trying to understand students, trying to connect with them, and for them to make good decisions about their abilities as well as to anticipate areas where they may struggle. And the data that is provided to campuses go far beyond what we talked about today. The interest major fit information is contained there, and of course the basic academic information and all of that available, but there's so much more about students' likelihood of enrolling on your campus, the kinds of schools that the student is considering, the factors that are most important for that student if they're deciding where they may wish to attend. And The data is found in our electronic score report or the paper report that is sent to campuses. You may have a CRM or a customer relationship management software program that is equipped to bring in those data, or you may have to do some standalone work to bring it in. But you'll find a map online for interpreting the file that is sent to campuses. And if there's further questions that you may have about that, there are details that our customer service folks can provide, or those who interact with colleges on a daily basis. We can give you some better detail and insight as to how to take full advantage of those data.
Okay. Got a question from Leslie. She says, despite these tools, graduation rates are still low. How can this data be used to improve graduation rates?
Well, Krista and Jeff may have something to add to this, but as a practitioner, you know, I used to chair our retention committee, and I would sit across the table from faculty who were asking that same question. And if I was on a college campus today, I would be administering the ACT Engage College product assessment. It's a very inexpensive assessment that can be administered in small scale or large scale, but I would be utilizing that data or that assessment in order to inform intervention strategies that could be more targeted. You know, the data is rich, but I use the analogy as I talk to colleges around the country. Many have built their enrollment operation on what I call a well of data, or just an abundance of data, and yet we're not utilizing the data as we could. And so I think that there are insights that are available from the broader ACT score report, you know, the number of readiness benchmarks that are met by a student, other factors that we know from other research that explain and can give us some insight about anticipating student risk factors. But I do think that if we use the data that's available, we really have an opportunity to impact graduation and completion. Unfortunately, there's much that just goes unused. And so I think the first step is actually to take advantage of this information and for it to be operationalized, not just a discussion. Kristen, Jeff?
Right. I would just add that there's no single remedy. I think all of our data taken together contributes, as Ken was mentioning. So our benchmarks, if we can early intervene, knowing kids are on track to meet the college readiness benchmarks in middle school, so that they don't have to enroll in remediation once in college, because we know once they enroll in remediation, they're not earning credits, they're more likely to drop out, it delays time to graduation. So getting on track early, as Ken mentioned, Engage is a great tool to help identify students who are not socially integrated and may need resources in terms of non-cognitive factors. The study Jeff mentioned with interest major fit, students who are in a major that aligns with their interests, if they're satisfied, if they're doing what they really love, they're more likely to graduate on time. And if they're in a major that they don't love, then it takes longer. And again, the costs add up. And so it might not be an academic issue, but they just can't finish because they can't pay for the additional years of schooling. And so, again, I don't think it's a one single bullet solution. It's taking all these different factors. It will be different solutions for different things. Some people need to find a major that really excites them. Some need to be motivated to work hard. Some need to get socially integrated. Some need math tutoring or advising. But I think our data can help on multiple fronts. Jeff?
Yeah, I'll just add one other point, that a lot of our research that looks at degree attainment as the outcome, what we find is that some of the predictors that we looked at, in particular the traditional measures, ACT scores and high school GPA, they're good predictors of first-year college grades. Once you know first-year college grades, that becomes a very strong predictor of degree attainment. And so part of the challenge, I think, in increasing degree attainment rates is improving performance that first year of college. So anything you do, interventions that that are introduced to help students adjust academically should also have that benefit of increasing degree attainment rates.
I think that's a great point. I wanted to add that we do partner with institutions and state systems and have done studies looking at the amount of credits they're earning. So are they earning enough credits over time? And that's predictive of graduation. So if there's interest for any of you out there still who want to partner with ACT and share data, we can help develop some of these models that take not only their pre-college characteristics, but then what courses they're taking once on your campus and matching them and helping you come up with a solution for your specific institution. We'd be happy to do so.
Okay, our next question is from Carlos, who asks, if a student's scores demonstrate that they may be less likely to succeed in college, how can educators help them guard against a self-fulfilling prophecy?
I think that's a concern we often hear about those tools, so I don't know if that's what you're indicating, but we don't want these tools to be prescriptive. They want more just to provide more information and to use that information, whether it be go to online resources to get test prep or training or a curriculum that will help bolster those skills, or just to find a major that we think aligns more. But again, these are models and they're not perfect models, as Kenton mentioned at the very beginning, and they shouldn't be prescriptive. We just, one piece of information that we hope will help guide students make better decisions for them.
I'll also add a little bit to what Krista just said. So as we discussed today, there are limitations to the predictive strength of our measures. So for example, the traditional measures, high school GPA and test scores, only get us about halfway to perfect prediction. So in some sense, that can be reassuring to students who have low test scores and low high school GPA, that in fact, their probability of success, while it's lower than other students, it's not zero. And in fact, kind of a reckoning with what it really truly means, that there are in fact a lot of students with lower scores that do persist and are successful, could be used to reassure some students as well.
Okay, our next question is from Nicholas, who wants to know, in terms of predicting first-year grades, does ACT have any data on pre-calculus? He asked because, like many STEM colleges, they struggle with whether to require pre-calculus as a prerequisite for enrolling as a freshman. Do we have a lot of data on pre-calculus in particular?
So when we talked about the rigor index, we talked about collecting data on 30 courses. One of those courses is called Beginning Calculus. So we do have the ability to look at the relationship between whether students have taken that course and how well they've done and subsequent success. I don't believe we've looked at that in for STEM-specific majors, but I think what we'd expect to find is that it does have a positive contribution. A lot of these courses, the contribution is not that large once you've accounted for all other data. So it could be, I'm guessing it's something that could contribute positively, but would not be a make or break deal breaker for success.
And I just wanted to add, Kenan, do you want to go ahead? Okay, thank you. About a year ago, maybe a little longer, we came out with a STEM benchmark, and how we derived that, similar to our college readiness benchmarks, but we looked at the courses. STEM majors students who were majoring in STEM, what courses they were taking in the first year in math and science, and overwhelmingly, first year STEM majors were taking calculus. And so that's how we derived the math portion of the STEM benchmark, and it's actually much higher. A STEM score of 26 is the STEM benchmark. But we have another study that came out, and we can provide the links to that study as well, that showed for those students going into STEM, what's predictive of being successful in terms of enrolling, and then we have a study in terms of first year grades, and then cumulative grades, and then even earning a STEM degree. And in that model, we had not only their ACT STEM score and high school GPA, but we looked at course taking patterns, and taking higher level math was associated with a higher likelihood of success. So we'll be sure to share that with you as well.
And to reiterate my earlier point about data that's available for score senders, not only do you receive the student's composite score and the four common subsets, right, English, math, reading, and science, but we also provide a STEM score for a student that is not on itself, by itself factored into the composite, but it allows you to evaluate the readiness for STEM of your students who are pursuing a STEM field. And we know that there are many in the field, as I was one, who did not really know about ACT's readiness benchmarks, number one, and I would really take advantage of that if I were back in the field. And now that we're providing the STEM score for students, it offers great insight for evaluating the specific readiness for students who are pursuing those fields.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes left on the Q&A. Our next question is from Marie, and it's a product-related question, wanting to know if a similar tool for interest major fit and academic discipline is being developed for students who are taking ACT Aspire. Such a tool had been affiliated with the ACT Plan test and was a great value in assisting students in selecting high school coursework and post-secondary decisions.
Yeah, so we do have a new application known as ACT Profile that's available that students can take the ACT interest inventory and actually a couple other assessments for free online, and they get some really nice detailed feedback on their plans and how they relate to their interests and other things that they may value. As far as the academic behavior measure, so that ACT Profile application can be accessed by anybody, I believe, including students in the earlier grade levels. It's offered separate from ACT Aspire, so unlike what we had with ACT Plan where you could take the interest inventory with it, it's a separate web application, but otherwise same instrumentation, some of the same measures as well. We do not have plans, as far as I know, of developing additional measures of academic behavior, although we do have, we currently go down to grade 6 for ACT Engage. There's 3 different versions of ACT Engage. There's the college version, a high school version meant for grades 10 through 12, and then another version meant mainly for middle school and junior high students for grades 6 through 9.
I'd add that the pre-ACT, which is intended to replicate the true ACT test-taking experience for students in the 10th grade, does include the interest major fit piece as well.
Okay, and we have time for one last question. This comes from Leslie, who's a high school counselor, and wants to know if ACT has tools to convince middle schools and elementary schools to use ACT tools to help students get up to speed before they get to high school.
Probably the best way of achieving that end is through the ACT Aspire assessments that are offered, as Jeff mentioned, from grades 3 through early high school. And that would be the best pathway. All of those assessments point toward our college readiness benchmarks to indicate the degree to which a student is on track to being ready. And that would be a great way for schools to incorporate the ACT language and pointing to our assessments that the students will encounter later in high school, but at earlier ages.
One other thing that I'd like to mention is that ACT acquired OpenEd a couple of years back, and OpenEd provides online curriculum that's free and it's linked to the ACT standards. So if they're taking ACT Aspire or taking the pre-ACT, they can see where their strengths and weaknesses are, and they can actually find curriculum that is aligned to that to help bolster any deficiencies that they may have.
Okay, and with that, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've got several questions that weren't answered. We will answer them via email in the next couple of days. Several people asked whether the presentation you saw today will be available for download, and the answer is yes. You'll receive an email in a couple of days with a link to the recorded presentation in addition to the slideshow that you saw today, so you'll be able to use that as well. So look for that in a couple of days. And otherwise, please follow us on social media, on Twitter @ACT for information about upcoming webinars. And otherwise, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.